My name is Steve Apter. I've been in and around the fire sector for the last 35 years. I was in the UK Fire Service for just over 31 years. And then the last 4 years, I've spent a year of that living and working in Saudi Arabia as the Director of Response for Red Sea Global. Got to explore the region and made some lifelong friends. And it's really good to be back. I also have my consultancy and I do some work, particularly around crisis management at a strategic level, including communications. So, I've not had a training course. I'm not yet competent, I think is the phrase. Thanks. I've now achieved the NFPA standard in clicker use. There we are. Right, if I was to make a statement, if I made two statements, the first one is this: I promise you this is the best presentation you're going to have all day. That's my statement. I'll make another statement. I assure you we are going to discuss communication strategies, when they work and when they don't work. And I'm going to do that in the 20-minute time allocated to me. Which one do you believe? Which one is the truth? I can't guarantee 20 minutes, I'll just tell you that, but absolutely. But we'll have all heard, and in Karachi, in the serious floods, tragic floods back in 2012, a minister put out a social media message based on all the information they were getting, promising that everybody would be saved. Unrealistic, set an unrealistic communication message, and was absolutely slaughtered for that message after the fact and lost his ministerial position. We're going to explore some of that. So, we're going to talk about crisis communication strategy. What is it? What is it I'm talking about here? Now, so far today, we've had some amazing presentations. I'm not saying this isn't going to be, just set an expectation. But as we were just hearing then, this isn't the sexy part of this. Designing in innovations, using technology, when incidents happen, responding, looking at some of the emerging and growing threats and risks we have to face. But the bit that can go wrong and can undo all the good work is your poor communications. And then, the second part of that is, we now know what it is. Why should we bother? Why bother? It's probably not going to happen. Communication straightforward. For many of you in the room, you might even have a communications or a PR department. This isn't about the first responders. This is also about business. This is just good business. And then we'll start to look at when it works well and when it doesn't. So, without further ado. So a crisis strategy, a communication strategy, there's many definitions, and there's some far, far better people than me who've written some great books on this, some people I'm lucky enough to call friends. A communication strategic approach to corresponding with people, that's internal, external, and organisations during a disruptive event. Back in the UK at the moment, we're having quite a few disruptive events through cyber attacks on a couple of major businesses. And interestingly enough, there's two businesses in the UK. There's one called Marks and Spencer's. I think probably most people might know that one. One you might not know is an organisation called the Co-op, Cooperative. Also stores, but they've got it's also business. Their communications from their CEO has been exceptional all the way through. Considered, timely. It's been a real relevant showcase for me. But a common strategy establishes how the organisation is going to prepare, respond and recover, and communications is integral to that. I've been, hands up, who's had to be the talking head for their organisation during a crisis to the media? Yeah, a few in the room? It's not the most comfortable position. It's not the most comfortable position. But let's talk about some of that. There was a phrase during COVID, a colleague of mine gave me this. And I don't know if this translates, but the time to learn to dance is not on the way to the ball. What it means is the time to develop your communications plan and have a strategy is not during the crisis. Now, many of you in the room will have business continuity plans. You test them, you trial them. Brilliant. How many of you include communications, media, and PR as part of that? We'll touch on that. So if you take nothing from this, today. I really like that phrase, because to me, that reminds me that this is an integrated and integral part of risk management. So, why bother? As I've just said, we're all in the business of risk. Risk management, when people say, Steve, describe what the modern fire and rescue service is, I say it's a risk management organisation. We identify, evaluate, assess, mitigate, learn, risk. So risk management, from a communications perspective, we are mitigating the risk of life, as we've been talking about today, when it goes wrong. And poor communication, as the example I gave, can actually, in some cases, increase the risk to life in its absolute worst. Risk to financial, we'll touch on some of those examples. Massive financial implications for some organisations when they get this wrong. Reputational risk, particularly in the region. You know, I was really blessed to be part of an organisation over in Saudi that is absolutely changing the landscape. Dubai, and UAE, what is going on is phenomenal. Globally being looked at and people learning from. But the reputational risk if we get this wrong is immense. The confidence in the organisation, but also the confidence in you as a leader. And that's both internal in your organisation, because they're looking at us, but also externally. Business continuity. I would argue COVID, because all of us, it was a global shared experience. All of us started to look at business continuity in a different way. And many of us are helping organisations improve their business continuity. And communications is part of that. We'll touch on this. There's some legislation issues around communications, around being able to inform and keep informed the public. In the UK, we have what's called the Civil Contingencies Act. The Civil Contingencies Act puts the onus on responders of different levels to ensure they warn and inform the community. And then we've got the lovely capital P word of politics. I'm not going to go any further with that one. I'm just mitigating the risk, okay? But politics is in play when it comes to communicating messages. Some of those can be little p politics, which we'll touch on. I want to give you an example. So, we're back in April 2010. Many of you in the room, imagine many of you in the room don't look old enough to remember this incident, but some of us remember this incident. It was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and fire. It was BP, British Petroleum, ran this, and this happened in April 2010. There was an incredible incident. It was one of the largest oil spills of its, at the time, well, it's still to this day. 4.9 million barrels of oil spilled into this. It was a massive environmental disaster. 11 people died. 11 people on that rig died. Their bodies have never been found. So just for a moment, you're the families, you know your loved one is there, you're seeing this live on the TV, and the chance of surviving this is slim. There were 17 serious injuries as well. The kind of number, and you look at the numbers there, litigation, 25.6, just shy of $26 billion. The response cost, 43 billion, and that figure I understand has increased subsequently. 43 billion, the cost to BP. But the bit I want to focus on, there is a crisis. Yep, we agree. By all definitions, we've got a crisis on our hands, both in terms of a response to a crisis, but also for us as an organisation, or for them as an organisation. I just want to show you this little video clip, and hopefully it will work. This is the chief executive being interviewed. The chief exec was a guy called Tony Hayward. So put yourself in the families don't know if they're going to see their loved ones again. This is a major incident, okay? And the chief exec is wheeled out as the talking head. Yeah, the talking head is a phrase we put representing the organisation. That's good. Chief exec, take responsibility. Now, hopefully, translation works okay. But
Sunday, BP's CEO apologized.
We're sorry, actually. We're sorry for the massive disruption it's caused to their lives. And, you know, we're There's no one who wants this thing over more than I do. You know, I'd like my life back.
Right. Did you hear that? There's nobody who wants this over more than I do because I want my life back. That's the message. That was the takeaway message from this. That was all the world had, was the chief exec. All he cares about was getting his life back. There was no apology, authentic apology. There was no reassurance that we are doing everything in our power to. Our hearts are, our thoughts are with those affected. We will learn the lessons. None of that. Nobody wants this over more than I do. Well, I'm hazarding a guess. I think there was a few people who did want this over more than he did, and he just wanted his life back. To make it even worse for Mr. Hayward, a couple of months later, he was called to a congressional hearing. I think it was President Obama at the time, and in that meeting, he basically described it as a relatively tiny oil spill. So he's still being really dismissive of the events. And President Obama was quoted as saying, "That man will never work with me again." The embarrassing thing for me, I live in the UK in a small place called the Isle of Wight. It's a little island, beautiful island, just off the south coast. Famous for yachting. If anybody's into their sailing, very famous. On the 19th of June, that year, the day after the congressional hearing, the chief exec of BP was filmed sailing his yacht in Cowes on the Isle of Wight on the round the island race. And when he was asked why he was there, he said, "I need to de-stress." He lost his job as a CEO. He lost his job. The shares plummeted in BP. Stakeholder confidence went, and not just because of the incident. It was purely down to his arrogance and poor communications. So the communication or miscommunication became the crisis, if you can imagine that. So that's an example of real life. It's used to this day by many to explain and to demonstrate when this thing doesn't work. This is another one. Now, some of you won't remember this guy. This was a British guy. This is a business. So these aren't, and this one was not an emergency incident. This wasn't a fire. People didn't die. This was a guy called Gerald Ratner. And Gerald Ratner was the CEO of a family business called the Ratner Group. Massive jewelers, jewelry, shops, stores, very, very big, very successful family business. He was speaking in 1991 in what he thought was a safe space. He was talking at an event at the Institute of Directors in Pall Mall in London. And at that presentation, he thinks he's with fellow business people, he can say, and so he was talking about some of his product. And Ratners were known for selling cheap things, but he had a really popular fan base, lots of customers, lots of business. Gerald Ratner said this. He said, people ask me, how can you sell this for such a low price? I say, because it's not very good. I'm trying to be polite here, respecting the country I'm in. Overnight, the value of that company plummeted. Gerald Ratner, i.e. Mr. Ratner of Ratner Group, was voted out by the shareholders, and for many years always said he'd been misquoted. He never, well, he did actually. He became a businessman on a smaller scale. But the crisis for that business was not global uncertainty. It wasn't political impact. It wasn't a major event. It was one line from the guy in charge. Because what happened, customers felt betrayed. Customers felt that he'd insulted them by association, and the shareholders lost faith in him as a leader. Poor communication when it goes wrong in a big way. So you can see one from a life risk, the other from a business and reputational risk. Ratner's never survived. The business never survived in its format as it was. So your reputation can be damaged or enhanced depending on how well you actually deal with a crisis, but also how well you are seen to be dealing with a crisis. And in the world we live now, we've got far more by the way of social media. So why does it go wrong? For me, there are generally 6 areas. There's different ways of slicing this up, but I think this is it. The first one for me is leadership in an organization. Whether you're in a crisis or it's just business as usual. Communication, effective communication, is not a priority. It's not part of your thinking, whether that's two-way communication or communicating with internally or externally, because there's a lack of a risk management mindset. Yeah, managing that risk, internal and external risk, at a corporate C-suite level. So if we've not got leadership, then we haven't got a plan. So if there's no plan, yeah, remember what I said, the time to learn to dance is not on the way to the ball. And you haven't seen my dancing yet. So no exercising, so we do testing of systems and processes, we do testing of the IT system goes down, the IT team are involved, nobody includes the media or the comms or the PR team, but a communications plan. So we're not testing it, we're not exercising it, because we haven't got leadership around this. There's also something for me about speed and the ability, the agility, and it depends on the culture of the organization. Because the agility to get short and long-term, looking at short impact events, long-term impact events, and getting timely messages out. Some of those may only be to your staff. Yeah, to reassure staff, this is what's happened, this is what we're doing, and this is what we need you to do about it. And over a long period as well. So having the agility to be able to move fast. Whereas there's a culture of, we keep this, that was the BP culture at the time. Really poor risk management culture, and a culture of secrecy, not wanting this to get out because of reputational damage. Too late. Your CEO created that. Being response ready, so it's part of who we are. Now, I understand we've got emergency response agencies here. That's kind of what we do. This is business. This is business. This isn't just for emergency responders. This is good business. The other one is two-way communication. Too many organizations are stuck in transmit, particularly when you're talking internally with staff and keeping them assured, or with stakeholders. What process have you got for two-way? Now, we're in a world of social media now, which is very, it's very one-way. It can be very one-way. But that lack of transparency of one-way, single transmit communication serves nobody. The BP, I go back to the BP CEO, and there are many other examples I could have given. Staff, your staff are your biggest stakeholder, key stakeholder, and they're often the last to know what's going on. Now, they become your reputational assassins then, because they don't know what's going on. You can imagine they're telling others. The other one is this balance between recovery, getting back to business as usual, and there's a fine balance. And that, I think, drives, and examples I've seen, evidence I've seen, is where that drives the culture. We just pretend that we just get back to business as usual, i.e., there's nothing to see here. Everything's fine. Business as usual. Well, it's not business as usual, because a resilient organization doesn't just want to default to business as usual. And I understand there are different priorities for public sector and private sector. But I go right back to the circle. If risk management is your thing, and it's part of who you are, then it is business as usual. Social media. Almost all the communication we get about disasters, we know about them before we've even put a message out. So we need to be proactive. We can't change that. That's where we are. AI supports some of that. I understand. Having people who are dedicated to looking at this is important. But understanding that social media is a critical part. Now, nature abhors a vacuum. In the absence of information from you or us, others will fill the vacuum. And they'll fill it with fake news, assumptions. Our role is to fill that vacuum and be agile enough. Some of you will remember this lady during COVID. Dame Jacinda Ardern was the Prime Minister in New Zealand. All through the process, everybody will make a judgment. This is a judgment. But after the reviews, National and international media was covering the New Zealand government response to COVID, as they were for all of us, but they praised her leadership and swift response to the outbreak. But the Washington Post and a number of journalistic outlets described her regular use of interviews, press conferences and social media as a masterclass in crisis communication. She demonstrated empathy, understanding, and if you get the opportunity through YouTube, there are some really great examples of how she used social media and used press conferences, regular information, and never shied away from the difficult ones. There are other examples of good use, but I just think Jacinda was to me, was an exceptional case. Right, so just summing up, and the time, because it's flashing at me now, the 3 takeaways here. Leadership. If communications is part of your culture, great. Yeah, it's a priority as part of your risk management strategy. Because my view is if you're not prioritizing communication, are you really prioritizing risk management? Secondly, it's about planning. Your business continuity plans, you all operate business continuity plans, is test them and trial them. On Monday, I did some work here in Dubai for one of the government agencies, and it was a room full of about 34, 35 people from one of the agencies, and we were doing a strategic scenario exercise. And what was brilliant, their comms and media team were part of the planning and the testing and exercising. Absolute first class. Sorry, and that was my final point, testing and exercising. Making sure that comms is meaningful, identify learning, and have your standby, have your sound bites ready, test them, have your talking heads ready and trained. Never put somebody out tired. You know, train, bring people in to advise you and support you, because believe me, it can make or break the business. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that was a scenario, that was at a fire in London. And I contacted the then Commissioner, Danny Cotton, and said, I think this will be over in a little while. I think we're okay. And then that's the scenario that was stood behind me. And that's why lots of people still say to this day, there's nothing to see here. We've got this fire under control. I got that one wrong on that day, and I take that with me to my retirement. But ladies and gents, thanks ever so much for listening. My voice made it. We got there. Thank you.